We all remember, don't we, those perfect clear blue skies, blazing sunshine, a summer never ruined by rain, spoiling days out or sporting events, packed beaches, super suntans, and probably many of us remember how we were in 1976 in the summer in Britain. The postcard nostalgia of the holiday that is very much still etched in our minds with family and friends. But was 1976 as wonderful as we like to remember? Now, without spoiling those golden memories, there was danger, drought, illness, and much worse. So why is 1976 so well remembered, even though we've had hotter days? And why was it recorded as the worst drought, since 1772 when records began, that we look back with so much nostalgia? Well, in order to find some background information, we do have to look at the previous year of 1975 to find out why the summer of 76 had such an impact in our lives and in the history books. Now, believe it or not, in June 1975 we had a cold snap. Actually gave us a flurry of snow. And yes, that line from the song that includes "Sometimes the snow comes down in June" does have some clout. And in fact, in a small town in Scotland on the 2nd of June, the lowest summer recorded temperature was 3.3 degrees. Minus 3.3 degrees, in fact. And there was widespread snow. In fact, there was enough to actually cancel some cricket matches. What about that? Now, apart from that experience, we had a much drier winter than normal in 75. Following that cold snap we had in June, the temperatures started to rise, and in fact it became the warmest summer since 1947. Even newspapers were reporting it as a heat wave with temperatures up to 90 degrees Fahrenheit and very little rain. In fact, we had 177 millilitres countrywide between June and August of that year, the average being around 240 mil. The highest temperature of that year was recorded in Heathrow at 34.2 degrees. Yet in Hampstead in North London in the August of that year, there was something that we call a supercell thunderstorm that is so localised that even other parts of London experienced nothing, not even rain. The storm brought down 170 millilitres of rain, all in that small little area, to the point where we had floods. Even giant hailstones were coming down hard enough to damage paintwork on cars. But meanwhile, parts of the country were getting 8 consecutive days of temperatures more than 30 degrees centigrade. But along with the heat of that summer, it was very, very dry. And what we didn't want was another dry year. Otherwise, we'd start to get problems. And we certainly did. So 1976 begins with a severe storm on the 2nd of January. Started in Scotland and moved to the south and into the Midlands. We had winds up to 100 miles an hour and structural damage, uprooted trees, and more sadly, 24 people lost their lives. Following this terrible incident of the winter of 76, the rest of the season was very dry, with only half the average rainfall falling on the UK. Reservoirs were still very low from the previous year, and the government was already beginning to get worried. We were on our way to a 16-month record for the driest period ever in the UK. Spring had arrived and people were loving it. Blue skies, warm weather, more than average, but not really. It was nothing unusual, but it was just the fact that we had a lack of rain. No April showers, but people had no idea how it was going to affect the UK in months to come. Easter was celebrated with temperatures of 21 degrees centigrade, and even though we were watching Happy Days and Opportunity Knocks on the TV and enjoying the Brotherhood of Man winning the Eurovision Song Contest, the government was setting their Water Save campaign as early as April. Now, I wonder how many of you can remember these leaflets and posters. Bath with a friend. Not only a poster, but a TV campaign with badges and t-shirts. I mean, talk about the permissive society. A little bit cheeky, eh? Turn me off, water is precious stickers to put above your taps in offices and factories, but a more or less risque version for schools, and I actually can remember seeing those. And bath in 5 inches of water, no more. And there were other things, such as toilet leaflets. Now, I don't want to be explicit about this, but it was something about the colour of the water in your loo, indicating whether you should flush or not. That's as far as I'm explaining that. Other prompts including reusing water to flush the toilets from maybe your washing or your washing machine. And there was another one that says, please do not flush your toilet until absolutely necessary, which always made great material for stand-up comments, saying just flushing the loo just for no reason, and they even brought toilets onto the stage to perform the act. I think they did it on Heidi Hall, but that was back in the 50s, supposedly. But in reality, things were getting very serious. Spring was turning into summer, and it was amazing to see people tanning themselves, paddling pools, in local parks, ice cream vans making a mint, hot pants, shorts, legs and arms out, beaches packed with sun lovers, and that's how most of us remember that summer, and it's still talked about today. It certainly is the summer that I'll never forget as kids, but as kids, heat did bother us less. And remember that programme Seaside Special on a Saturday night? Can't ever remember that programme being spoiled by rain. The events of carnivals and people enjoying the heat. It was all over the papers, the headlines saying daily temperatures followed by words like sizzling or baking, and people able to crack open and cook an egg on a pavement. And it was true, we actually did this. We didn't eat the egg though, as you can imagine. But it wasn't any amber warnings or red warnings. Nothing like that existed. You just got told by the weatherman, it's going to be hot again. But on the serious side, the tarmac was melting, causing traffic and infrastructure problems as the summer approached with still no rain. The average temperature in June was around 17.6 degrees centigrade, which doesn't sound a lot, but it was 2.9 degrees more than average. The peak temperature of that month was over 35 degrees centigrade, and the Labour government had to appoint their first drought minister, and frankly, he didn't want the job. Perhaps his rain dancing skills weren't up to scratch. So one wonders, what the hell could he do? But you know what? He did all right. His name was Dennis Howell. He added humour and a little bit of cheeky content to his campaign, which really boosted morale, gave Britain something to laugh about. Some may think in hindsight that his campaign wasn't that serious or not serious enough, but it worked. He brought in a water act which forced the water companies to ban hose pipes, place standpipes on the streets to replace the home water supply, and water companies could cut off households with their water supply by August 1976 if necessary. But what about the impact, the serious side that the news wasn't reporting on their front pages? Now, whether it was for morale or to stop panic, I don't know, but the impact was serious. It held the hottest day recorded in history in August, reaching 36.7 degrees Celsius, only to be later beaten in 2022. People did suffer. Homes had no air conditioning, neither did factories, offices, even trains, or cars, come to that. So if they didn't like the heat, like me, there was no escape. Hospital admissions soared with people who had health conditions. See, the air was dry, and this becomes more healthy during droughts as particles fly around in the air such as dust, pollutants and allergens due to the bone-dry grounds and the dust. Now, I can't find any statistics, but the NHS did report to have a large surge in hospital admissions during the time due to heat-related illnesses and emergencies. And sad to say, there were up to 2,500 extra deaths relative to the summer of 1976. Now, from my memory, there was a lack of information regarding people keeping hydrated. Bottled water was practically unheard of, and people were really not made aware of the importance of keeping hydrated during hot weather spells. We had wildfires from dried up land where vegetation had just more or less turned to hay. There was a deficit of crops that were valued in 1976, this was, at £500 million. One forest fire in Dorset led to the destruction of 50,000 trees. Now, after 45 days in a row with no rain, the ground was very dry. This obviously shoved up food prices. Now, one of my early memories of this year was a bag of chips going up by 3p a bag. Now, that was enormous in 76. Even though the seaside had benefited and the ice cream van was making his money, many industries slowed down as the water companies had less water available and they lost a ton of money. And by the end of August, some reservoirs had actually dried up, with people being able to walk on the bed of the dried up banks. Whilst on average, Britain was down to 10% of its reserve, and there was panic in Downing Street. So much panic that they had to make a contingency, because you cannot tell the weather 5 days before it all happens. Even with today's technology, they still get it wrong. So, planning on for more drought, this is what was going to happen next. All standpipes would be switched off and all domestic water supplies finished in the household. Manufacturing shutdowns, especially those using water for cooling systems during operations, which included British Steel and the coal industry. The Navy was on standby to transport water from less affected areas to more effective areas in Britain. By the end of August, Britain had 14 days of water left. So what would happen if Britain would have dried up completely? Well, Europe couldn't help, well, not locally, because they were in the same boat. However, talks were underway for international help from non-affected countries making use of the European Trade and Protection Networks. Plus, the then called the EEC, now today known as the European Union, were prepared to step in with food and water aid. Luckily, this didn't happen, because in early September, although we still had some days over 30 degrees centigrade in temperatures, a week in, down came the rain. Now, I can honestly remember the joy watching those storms and that heavy rain, sitting on the doorstep, watching people actually stripping down to their underwear, dancing in that rain, and it was glorious. No umbrellas, just sheer exhilaration, and boy did it rain. In some areas there was at least 6 inches of rain falling down on a daily basis, with cracking thunderstorms and lightning. It was amazing to watch. This did, however, lead to local floods, and we had to appoint a flood minister. It was the same fellow. But that was how it was, because the ground was so dry, it took a while to absorb the water. But the reservoirs were beginning to fill, and by the 9th of September, believe it or not, Scotland even had snow. In fact, the UK received its wettest September since records began in over 250 years. What a year.